Wine Club is a pretty good episode of Frasier. Never going to be a personal favourite, but certainly it's not too bad. This is the 17th episode of the 7th season of Frasier. It's directed by Kelsey, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it starts off in Cafe Nervosa with Martin and Claire Wojadubakowski. She's played by Anita Gillette, and her husband Stan has recently passed away. She and Martin are having an interesting conversation, and we'll come back to them in a little bit. Frasier and Roz are then there, and it was a little bit of a random scene, to be honest. I feel like there was a bit of padding even in that beginning, which was a bit strange. But then we end up going to Mel and Niles, and Niles is getting ready. He's going to be nominating Frasier for Corkmaster at the Wine Club, and Mel asks if Niles had any interest in being Corkmaster, and it turns out he does, which I thought was quite interesting. And Niles tells Frasier this once they're at the wine club. Needless to say, Frasier's a bit irritated by this because he thought he would be nominated, everybody would vote for him, it would be an easy win. But he now then nominates Niles. He can't exactly say, no, I won't nominate you, because then Niles could just do the same thing. And it turns out they each got 14 votes. And because it's a tie, they have to do a blind taste test. And I thought this was quite a fun scene. I quite liked it. They're sipping wines, trying to identify what they are. And the last wine was a trick. Frasier thought it was one wine, Niles thought it was the other, and it turns out the wine was actually a blend of 45% one wine, 55% the other. Niles won by 10%. That has to hurt. Frasier's clearly not happy about this, but Niles is quite happy. We then spend the rest of the episode in the apartment, and Mel has been invited over for brunch to meet everybody. It's a nice thing to do. Martin's feeling awkward as he slept with Claire. And to be honest, I feel like this part of the narrative with Martin just wasn't very well written. I feel like they're trying to address an interesting topic. How soon is too soon to sleep with the widow? And yeah, Martin necessarily shouldn't feel guilty about it. But then I think some people might think, well, actually, you should. Because it's not the right thing to do. You're taking advantage of somebody. But then she's a consenting adult. So, I don't know. I feel like it was just not very well written. And I feel like they were trying to just pad out the main narrative, and it just didn't work very well. Also, the main narrative's not that interesting either with Mel. But I think that's largely because I don't like Mel. And if I didn't like her before, I certainly wouldn't like her when she came over to the apartment and said that they'll have to be locking Eddie out on the balcony. First of all, that's dangerous because everybody's going to be eating. Shut up and get out. That's absolutely horrendous. And Frasier finds out that it was Mel who suggested Niles run for Corkmaster. So needless to say, he's not a big fan of Mel. Roz doesn't like Mel. Roz is there, which again felt a little bit strange. Daphne doesn't like Mel, but she's drinking a lot of Bloody Marys and is having a merry time. So I thought Daphne was a nice ray of sunshine in this, and nobody likes Mel. And Mel leaves because she gets a beeper and she has to go. And Niles finds out, kind of accidentally, that nobody likes her. And he leaves, and we kind of leave it at that in this episode. And then Daphne scolds Martin for sleeping with Claire, which I think was quite interesting. It does give us a bit of balance, because the others had been saying, you shouldn't feel guilty about this, you're fully grown adults, which is fair enough. But then Daphne was saying that he was taking advantage of her while her husband was barely dead in the ground. And I thought that was, a bit of balance, and I thought that worked quite well. And then Daphne pointed out that we all have impulses we'd like to explore, but don't. And I think it's very clear in that moment that she was referring to Niles. And of course, bearing in mind, she's still engaged to Donnie. And I think it's quite interesting that ever since we had Niles, or it was revealed to Daphne that Niles is very much in love with her, Donnie's not really been around. Not because he knows or anything, but I just think that was a really interesting decision. And I think it works quite well, and I think it gives us time to focus on Daphne on her own, and by Daphne being on her own a lot, it's clearly giving her time to think about things as well. So I thought that was an interesting, presumably conscious decision. The episode is fine. It's not my favourite. I don't think the narratives are perfectly handled, but I think there are some decent enough moments. It's nice to know that everybody else, apart from Niles, feels the way that I feel about Mel. I don't think she's meant to be a likeable character. She certainly doesn't come across as a likeable character, and I thought that was very, very well done. So, all things considered, while it's not a favourite episode, I think it's safe to say that Wine Club is still ultimately not a bad episode of Frasier. I wouldn't skip it. If I'm binge watching season 7, I wouldn't skip it. I doubt I'd choose to watch it though, if I was just selecting a random episode to watch. So not too bad, not a favourite, but ultimately still a decent episode of Frasier.